Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, Derek and I have the video today that you guys have been asking me to make, and I had always planned. We're going to be putting the ModRetro M64 in overclocking mode directly against the Analogue 3D in their own overclocking mode. Because one of the number one questions I've been getting since I did the review and then the re-review is how these two things stack up against each other. So we're going to be doing some direct head-to-head comparisons today between the ModRetro M64 and the Analogue 3D when it comes to overclocking and then just general performance. And do be aware that this is basically an unfair fight because obviously the Analogue 3D has existed for over a year where the ModRetro M64 has existed for about a week in retail hands. So it's one of those things, in a year if I reran this test you might get a completely different result, but I review what I have in front of me right now, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top here, we're going to be going on Analogue 3D with Perfect Dark because I think it is the best example of the difference between these two systems. Anytime you're watching Analogue 3D, you'll see the icon at the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Anytime you're watching M64 footage, you will see the icon for that console. And I will say Perfect Dark is probably the best example of what Analogue 3D can do with overclocking. And just so you know, neither of these games is being run on the performance patch because there is a frame rate patch out there that'll actually improve performance. These are bone stock ROMs, and this is the result I got from running them basically side by side, capturing one then capturing the other. Now moving over to the ModRetro M64, definitely runs a lot faster than a stock N64, which I will show you in a little bit, but it definitely isn't quite keeping pace with Analogue 3D. I'd probably say it's about 10 to 15% lower. And yes, I know there is a frame timing graph that you can put up on top of something like Perfect Dark, but I want you to pay attention more to the screen cadence and more to the overall flow of the footage and less to a number, because numbers are artificial even if they are really empirical data versus the feel, which you know I love to talk about on the channel. This is still definitely running a lot faster than what any N64 could do if you just popped a cartridge in or if you ran either of these at stock clock speeds, but like I said, definitely a little bit slower than what you're seeing on something like Analogue 3D. Now my guess would be that this can definitely come up in the future because they are still working on the core, and in their roadmap, ModRetro has stated that they are going to be improving overclocking as well. But out of the box right now, this is the result you're going to get. Still a very good result, but not quite as fast as Analogue 3D. Now that kind of gap will definitely narrow down depending on what game you're playing, but there's something about ModRetro M64 versus Analogue 3D in Perfect Dark where the overall kind of efficiencies and refinements to the core are just working slightly better on the Analogue 3D. So go ahead and get a little bit more of this footage, and then we're going to move over to something like Analogue 3D so you can take a look and see. In the same area, you will see that in some instances the camera pans are smoother, you're getting more frames per second. It's not going to always be consistent, sometimes these things do pull neck and neck, but Analogue 3D seems to be able to run slightly faster when there's more things on screen at once. So if you have a bunch of enemies in front of you, you'll get a couple extra frames out of Analogue 3D. Now the challenging part is this game is not something that basically happens the same way every single time, so on one run you might see better or worse performance just depending on how many characters actually stack up at once. And just for a baseline, this is Perfect Dark running at stock speeds. I'm not even going to tell you which console it is because it really doesn't matter, it will do the same thing. Both ModRetro M64 and Analogue 3D make Perfect Dark playable where I would consider stock clock speeds to be completely unplayable, but you can clearly tell that Analogue 3D still runs slightly ahead of ModRetro M64 at their highest overclock settings each. Now moving back to Analogue 3D, take a look at the smoothness in the head bob here as Joanna Dark moves through the area and the camera pans, because you're going to see we have not 1, 2, 3, but 4 different enemies in front of us. The more enemies that are in front of you, the more the actual hardware or this instance core needs to render those. And when you come out into an open area with no enemies in front of you, you will get a higher frame rate because the overall core is doing less to render the image. Now if we move over to the ModRetro M64, you're going to see we're going to have the same 4 enemies come in, but as that 4th enemy comes in, we kind of drop back from par on the actual Analogue 3D comparison to a slightly lower frame rate. where when we come into this open area here, we're getting a really nice frame rate because it isn't rendering as much. And again, with software performance updates on the core, M64 could end up rivaling Analogue 3D. But again, we're talking about the results today and not the results that you would see in a year from now, because we just don't know what's going on. And because the M64 core is based on the work of Robert or FPGA Zoomspas on the Mr. FPGA side of things, that was a comparison I ran back in the day, and I would say it's definitely getting more frames per second on the M64 side than the Mr. core, but not as many frames per second compared to Analogue 3D, at least in the example of Perfect Dark. So if you're looking for one game results, now you know it. Perfect Dark is going to run like 10 to 15% faster than M64. Let's move over to GoldenEye, sticking with both a first-person shooter theme as well as a rare theme, just because I know these are the games you really want to see compared side by side and back to back. And I will say this is a much tighter and closer race on GoldenEye than it is on Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark really seems to be the outlier. Whatever secret sauce Analogue has underneath those overclocks seems to give that game the biggest boost of any of them. And trust me, you're not going to see every single game compared here. This is just kind of what I wanted to take a look at, what I thought would be popular, because you guys request a bunch of games that I kind of just narrowed down to the things I hear the most, and GoldenEye was definitely one of them. So now that you've seen this area on the actual Analogue 3D, let's move right back to it on M64 and we'll take a look. It is a smooth experience. It definitely is maybe missing like 5 frames per second, but it is a faster GoldenEye than you would get if you ran it on stock speeds as well. But GoldenEye definitely didn't have anywhere near the performance issues as something like Perfect Dark did when it released, because that game just pushed the N64 hardware way further than it ever was meant to go. And before you ask me to do a 4-player capture where you have 4 different screens on screen at once with 4 players playing a deathmatch, here's the reality situation. Unless I can convince my 2 dogs and a cat to hold a controller and learn how to play this game, it is just me at home while my wife works, so you get what you get on this one. But you will see a slightly higher frame rate on Analogue 3D when you do have multiplayer, from what I've talked to other people about. Now moving into the first level here, again Analogue 3D, take a look at how the camera moves, take a look at the animation quality and speed. Now so you're going to see the differences. Sometimes if you just kind of pay attention, you can really see a little bit of difference in motion cadence. I know I keep using the word motion cadence, but it really is my #1 indicator to see how things are running comparatively, because I don't believe there is actually a frame counter on something like GoldenEye either. And unfortunately on Mr. FPGA, we did have a frame counter in the core, but on M64, that does not seem to be a feature that moved over from the Mr. core, so it really isn't anything I could turn on. But honestly, I'd love all of these consoles to have a frame counter, so it would be a lot easier. Less talking about the vibes and motion cadence, and more being able to put a small number on the top left-hand corner of the screen. But even then, I feel like you guys stare at it too much and don't actually see the video. But going through this area, it is smooth, and that is because we're obviously running it at a higher clock speed. Now do remember, not every single N64 game will even allow for something like overclocking to give you more frames. Some games have a frame rate cap, their logic is tied to that frame rate cap, and it doesn't matter if you're on M64 or on Analogue 3D, you're going to get the frames you're allowed to have, and unless somebody patches that out, you're never going to get any more. But Perfect Dark on Analogue 3D is an excellent example of a really good running game, but it kind of is funny. We're talking about the GoldenEye decomp recently. All of the static recomps and PC source ports for N64 games will blow any FPGA console out of the water without even trying. That is something to keep in mind for the future. Now moving back to the M64, we're going to go through the exact same area, and again, this is running well, but everything here, at least on the rare side of things, I really feel like we're 10% less on the overall frame count, and I am dialing up the overclock as far as it will go, but again, overclocking mode is still in development for M64. We could end up in a future where this thing definitely takes the lead, or we could end up in a future where it's par or even still slower than Analogue 3D. It will be fun to kind of see how the software roadmap updates as we get into like the next 12 to 18 months, because the Analogue 3D that you got in the box when it first came out is definitely not the same Analogue 3D that you have under your TV today. And I know I've been critical of Analogue in the past with some really iffy software updates and lack of communication, but it seems like at least on Analogue 3D, they've been delivering some consistent software updates and new features that people have been requesting, which is really nice to see. I just wish they still hadn't pretended that the DAC completely does not exist. A lot of promises on that one with a lot of under-delivery. But honestly, again, both of these are going to be good experiences. If you're looking to buy one console to get the absolute fastest frame rates out of N64 games that will allow it, and you want to buy it today, then just pick up the Analogue 3D. If you already have an Analogue 3D, really nothing there from ModRetro side of things to kind of compel you to pick a second one up. But if you want to pick up one and you don't care about the absolute bleeding edge of frame rates, maybe just pick by the price which one you like better. But taking a look at the intro to Beetle Adventure Racing here, this comparison is going to be slightly different because I'm not going to show you the same level. I want to talk about rendering in engine and what's going on. But at least on the intro here, Beetle Adventure Racing definitely seems to be running faster, and that is basically a pivot for what we've seen so far on Analogue 3D, where I definitely have a sense of this just basically having more frames per second and a little bit more fluidity in the overall performance. Neither of these is cycle accurate to where those texts would actually come up on a real N64 console, but if I never told you about that, only people that love to check these things would probably ever know about it. And if you've never played Beetle Adventure Racing before, I can't stress enough, one of the best racing games on the platform, and one that I really hope we see a recomp or source port for soon, because I want this thing in 16:9 at 120 plus frames per second. But as we go through the first level here, the first course on the M64, pay attention to how the screen moves and sways, how the car animates, and everything else. This is far and away faster than anything an N64 console could ever deliver to you. Now I know this isn't going to make everyone happy, but when I compare it to the Analogue 3D, I'm actually going to go to a different track to talk about sometimes you may get better performance in one level versus the other in comparison to the two consoles. Because here on the mountain area, we do have a little bit more fog, but I ran this test in the background, and this is one where the ModRetro M64 does get higher frame rates. But that kind of is the tricky thing about actually testing these. Depending on what's going on screen at any given moment in time, it can skew the test results, because of course this is a race. The CPU is not going to do the same thing the same way every single time, and you're not going to race the same line every single time. So it really just comes down to sometimes the run you're having and what you're actually seeing in front of you. Now, not overclocking, but something that a lot of people did ask about, we're going to talk about resolution switching from the ModRetro M64 to the Analogue 3D, because some N64 games love to on-the-fly swap between 240p and 480i, and that's because it was designed around a CRT television, and those things could switch resolutions without breaking a sweat. Now, on modern scalers, whether they're external or even the internal scaler on FPGA hardware, that switch and how your TV handles it and how your capture card handles it is completely different than a CRT television. And I will say, you don't want the screen to black out. You don't want to have to wait a couple seconds for it to actually get signal again. So here on the ModRetro M64, when Leon goes off screen and the camera angle changes, you will see that the screen goes completely to a different size. That is switching the resolution. You can see the interlacing lines here. This is just something that you're going to have to deal with when you deal with N64, no matter what console you actually use. But you'll see as we go from screen to screen, that resolution changing, when it does happen, is smooth, it's fluid. You have maybe like a frame or two where you actually notice it, and then from there you're perfectly fine. And don't forget, some screens just aren't going to do that whatsoever, but you'll see another one right here coming up. It just kind of changes the size of the screen, and you see those interlacing lines come up every once in a while. So now that you've seen what that looks like on the ModRetro M64, let's move back over to Analogue 3D and see how it handles the resolution switching in Resident Evil 2. So you'll see here you actually get a black screen, and that's for exactly 7 frames. I counted it in Resolve on the timeline, just advancing 1 frame, and it was 7 frames till the image came back. And it's completely subjective as to which one you think is better or worse. Neither one of them are doing the right or wrong thing, they're just doing the thing they decided that would be the best for what they were actually working on when they were making this core. And again, this is a very hard thing to actually get right, and both consoles definitely get it right. Because if you used to be on something like a FrameMeister back in the day and you tried to play this on N64 upscaling it, you'd basically lose signal for like 5 seconds or so, and that would absolutely just be a complete deal breaker. For me personally, I preferred not going to the black screen. I kind of prefer actually having just like 2 frames of it resizing in real time and then appearing. But again, you can leave a comment down below and you tell me, and you'll see one more time here on Analogue 3D. It does go for that black frame result. There's not a ton of games on N64 that do this, but it is an example of how they work, how they contrast and differ, and how they are similar. Now, one thing I will say, and this again isn't exactly overclocking, but sometimes on the Analogue 3D, I feel like the colors are ever so slightly hot on some very bright games. And again, it really is hard to say what the quote-unquote correct color is, because we all have our memories of playing N64 on a CRT television. But if I plug something like the Analogue 3D in, if I plug something like the ModRetro M64 in, on games that really use a lot of bright colors, I would say that I am slightly like 1 to 2% happier with what I get out of ModRetro M64 and how their color science works than I am with Analogue 3D. And don't get me wrong, I think both do a great job. It is again just subjective. But if we move over to the M64 on Bomberman Hero, yes, a different level, but still has those iconic yellows in the background. The saturation is ever so slightly better, in my opinion. But again, you can leave me a comment down below, and you can tell me what you think about these, because like I said, no one's ever going to agree. Color science really is something. You're not right or you're wrong, so long as it isn't something that you have a base mark benchline for to judge against, and in this instance, we just don't. So if you want the best overclocking performance, Analogue 3D is going to give that to you today. If you want a console that plays N64 carts and FPGA and you don't own one, if you want better overclocking, Analogue 3D. If you want to buy versus the price, M64. And if you don't know which one to buy, go ahead and flip a coin, go from there. But short of that, that is the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. You would be asking for this one, so I figured I would give it to you. And now you know the results. And again, in a year or so, I might run this test again. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.